Intelligence reports he was additionally allegedly circuitous in Operation Condor, the arrangement of backbreaking cooperation amid dictatorships in the Southern Cone and facilitated contacts amid biologic traffickers and bounded ability structures. His bequest was not aloof that of a fugitive. Barbie congenital, a arrangement of access that circuitous politicians, businessmen, and associates of the German Association in Latin America. The complete birth of Klaus Barbie, including his son Klaus Georg, except maintained a position of complete silence. Georg lived for years in Spain and Germany, affiliated to adumbrel business activities, including accoutrements trafficking, advanced companies, and Aegis consultancies. In the 1990s, he was brash in Germany for declared abutment for neo-Nazi groups, but was never convicted. His aftermost name charcoal out of the media spotlight, but his bequest lives on the margins of political and bread-and-butter networks that accept auspiciously recycled themselves. The best advancing aspect of the Barbie case is not alone the blackout of his family, but additionally the normalization of his adventure in assertive Bolivian circles. For years, Klaus Barbie was adequate by bounded businessmen and politicians, who brash him advantageous in the repression of communism. He was never voluntarily extradited. He alone fell afterwards a abiding, all-embracing attack led by French activists and analytic journalists. Back he was assuredly approved in France in 1987. The balloon arise not alone his crimes, but additionally the Aegis arrangement that had abiding him for decades. Today, Barbie's name rarely appears in Bolivian accessible life. There are no plaques, no memorials, no official statements about his time in the country. His adventure has been captivated into institutional abeyance, and in that abeyance, his brainy brood except prospered. Some are affiliated to all-embracing far-right networks, others repurposed into artful companies or paramilitary structures. The Barbie case demonstrates that the bequest of the Third Reich lives not alone in the surname, but in the networks these men helped anatomy and in the ideologies they managed to beard themselves as political pragmatism. A lesser-known but appropriately important amount is Gudrun Berwitz, babe of Heinrich Himmler, arch of the SS and one of the capital architects of the Holocaust. Unlike Added Birth, who bankrupt with the ancestors' legacy, Gudrun maintained an abiding allegation to her father's anamnesis and to Nazi credo until her afterlife in 2018. He never accustomed Himmler's albatross for the Holocaust and adherent, abundant of his developed activity to rehabilitating his image. He was an animate affiliate of Stille Hilfe, Bashful Help, an alignment that provided acknowledged and banking abutment to above SS admiral and added war criminals. Best advancing is that Gudrun did not accomplish from the margins of the system. For decades, she formed as a secretary in the West German Federal Intelligence Service, BND, area. According to declassified documents, she acclimated her position to advice above Nazis balk justice. This aggression of autonomous institutions illustrates how the bequest of Nazism does not consistently appear in the anatomy of abolitionist address, but rather through a bashful and able attendance oral, the arrangement itself. Both cases casts and the Barbies forth with abstracts like Gudrun Berwitz's accession, a acute catechism for a breast memory. Except we absolutely affected the bequest of Nazism, or has it artlessly mutated? What happens aback the birth of abyss? Not alone abort to accost their past, but instead use it around or absolutely as a political platform. How abounding ancestors' silences except become normalized accessible discourse. At a time aback, the far appropriate is accepting arena in Europe, Latin America, and the United States. Area abhorrence accent is buried in narratives of abandon or civic sovereignty. The assay of these abstracts takes on renewed urgency. Capitalism as a arrangement does not in itself agreement a breach with the past. It can become, and absolutely has become, a date for new forms of affiliated authoritarianism. The allegorical ability of assertive surnames may abandon from accessible debate, but their access continues in aldermanic decisions, cardinal alliances, and speeches that address to abhorrence and acerbity as political drivers. The casting Barbie case about scratches the surface. In Germany, Austria, Argentina, and added countries, dozens of surnames of Nazi agent accept alternate to accessible activity, with detached profiles, tailored discourse, and ability structures that assure them they don't allegation to above board. Acknowledge their affiliation. It's abundant to not abdicate assertive values, to avert assertive policies, to accumulate animate a address that in new forms perpetuates old divisions. Vera Goldberg, a baby kisser with the German conservative CDU affair for decades, kept his Jewish origins abstruse while advocating a kin-clearing behavior and a able cultural nationalism. Alone afterwards, his retirement, was it apparent that his father, a Jew who adapted to Christianity, had survived the Holocaust. His case reflects the circuitous web of identities and loyalties that characterize the political brood of Nazism. Bodies accommodating to avert account, abutting to what they themselves, in addition, ambience would accept condemned. It's important to agenda that not all birth who access backroom do so by adopting complete positions. Nicholas Frank, son of the Izurisier, barbarous governor accepted of Poland, Hans of Frank, accomplished afterwards the Nuremberg trials, became a left-wing announcer and biographer above board, accusatory his father's crimes. His accord in the accessible apple has consistently been as an analyzer of absolutism and a apostle of actual memory. His book, My Father, the Nazi Criminal, is a affecting archetype of how some birth use their position to combat, not perpetuate, the ancestors' legacy. At the added acute is Rudiger von Weimar, son of SS-accepted Max von Wehr, who had an acknowledged adept career in the Federal Republic of Germany, eventually acceptable agent to the UN and admiral of the accepted assembly. He never about mentioned his father's past, but he never disowned it either. His activity was different. He congenital a political character based on Europeanism and all-embracing reconciliation, as if the best way to coffin the accomplished was to anatomy a present, founded on opposing values. These contrasts acknowledge that years its use has accomplished to be bordering and has re-entered the ballader fray. Unlike the birth of Himmler, Goebbels, or Eichmann, abounding of Benito Mussolini's brood, except not alone kept their surname, but except acclimated it as a accessible tool. None except accounting memoirs of rupture. None except led educational campaigns about the crimes of fascism. None except afflicted their identity. Instead, some except acclimated that birth as a caste, and others artlessly as ancestors' continuity. What generates bounce in Germany generates votes in Italy. The political ambience has additionally been different. Anti-fascism in Italy has coexisted with a cultural bequest of homesickness, with acknowledged neo-fascist parties, and with a bourgeois that has at times relativized the past. The acceleration of Giorgia Meloni, whose political accumulation has roots in post-war neo-fascism, has added normalized the ambience so that birth of the Duce can authority appointment afterwards massive controversy. 100 years afterwards the advance on Rome, the Mussolini birth is still present, not from the caliginosity or from remorse, but from the microphone, the ballot, and the seat. During the acceleration of the Third Reich, the hierarchs of the civic left-wing administration led lives apparent by luxury, opulence, and privilege. Acknowledgement to calmly organized authoritative and bread-and-butter structures, they accumulated astronomic fortunes and adopted a diplomacy agnate to that of the old European nobility. Palaces, mansions, armored trains, customized automobiles, and all-inclusive art collections fabricated up the accustomed ambience of abstracts like Adolf Hitler, Hermann Göring, and Heinrich Himmler. The Führer's abutting amphitheater resided in arty backdrops such as Karrenhall, Goring's acreage in the Prussian forests, or the Berghof, Hitler's alpine retreat in the Bavarian Alps. They Catholic in comfortable armored Mercedes-Benz 770Ks, symbols of ability and sophistication, while Hitler acclimated his appropriate train, the Furandu, able as a adaptable address with a appointment allowance and aegis systems. Their circadian lives included banquets with silverware, alien wines, and hunting contests organized for the activity elite. They enjoyed vacations in absolute spas like Bad Gastein or in the resort complexes of Obersalzberg, consistently amidst by confiscated art, absolute artisan appliance, and an aggregation of claimed servants, claret monuments, the awe-inspiring homes of the men of the Reich. During the acceleration of civic socialism, the baronial Nazis enjoyed aberrant wealth, commensurable alone to the old German dignity that disqualified the country during the absolution era. This was reflected in the comfortable abode of the Führer and his trusted men such as Hermann Göring. Indeed, Göring endemic one of the best absorbing estates of the Nazi era, Karrenhall. In 1933, the Prussian accompaniment donated about 120 hectares of acreage to Hermann Göring in his role as Abbot Admiral of Prussia for his lifetime use and enjoyment. This arena is one of the bigger forested areas in Germany, and akin at that time, it was advised one of the best admirable regions in the country. Göring began architecture and astronomic acreage circuitous with a abode to host the Nazi leadership. In 1937, the new Karen anteroom was acutely inaugurated. The breadth had accomplished to be a simple hunting abode and became a massive abode in the woods. The new circuitous consisted of a two-story basic architecture belted by two wings. Everything was abiding about an ample autogenous courtyard which was accessed via an access affected by two rows of age-old trees. The aboriginal architecture was accustomed as the gross hail breadth Göring entertained guests about an ample broiler and a across-the-board window overlooking the forest. The alive allowance led to two accommodation accustomed as the gold anteroom and the argent anteroom breadth. The abbot assuredly displayed the ability accustomed to him by nobles and the wealthy. The absolute abode was amidst by admirable breadth, adorned with life-sized brownish statues of animals. Every window had a resting angle of the lakes and forests. Göring and his wife lived in the axial building. The larboard accession consisted of a music room, a huge library, a gym, sauna, and calm pool. The appropriate accession had been appointed as the bedfellow accession and included bedrooms, a dining room, kitchen, and agents' accommodations. It allegation be said that Göring was a benevolent bang-up to his staff, and the account abode were calmly furnished. In the new Karen Hall, the accommodation featured a comfortable and adorned appearance application, the finest abstracts available. The floors were able marble and covered with big-ticket carpets. Paintings by Krennek and Rubens abashed on the walls, sometimes ample 3 and 4 layers high. This affluence akin assorted with how the Führer himself lived. With added antisocial habits, Hitler adopted to alive in an actual comfortable accommodation. Amid at Cardinal 16 Prince Regentenplatz in the Bogenhausen commune of Munich. The accommodation alive, the absolute third attic of an arty 5-story architecture advised in the Jugendstil Art Nouveau appearance by Munich artisan Franz Popp amid 1907 and 1908. Hitler confused there in 1929, but in January 1935 he assassined so. The atelier accord to clean and redecorate the ample collapsed at the abandoned amount of 120,000 German marks, added than 10 times the boilerplate bacon of the time. On April 25, 1935, aback the accommodation was about complete, the Circadian Telegraph arise in commodity about the renovations, claiming that the Führer was authoritative the works and that all the accoutrement and decorations were actuality accomplished according to Mr. Hitler's own designs. This commodity accounting by the Nazi columnist declared the Führer's adulation for German art and his affection for music, cogent readers that the adornment of his accommodation follows the ballsy German blush palette of blue, gold, and white, affected in Wagner's operas and the appliances of the aforementioned style. The propaganda's ambition was to portray Hitler as an artisan and adept of accomplished ability to abduction the absorption of the German aerial class, his neighbors in Munich's richest district. The Führer acclimated this abode not alone to draft, but additionally to accomplish deals and conduct German politics. In this comfortable apartment, the anatomization of Czechoslovakia was alive and the conspiracies for the approaching invasions of Poland and France began. As he rose to power, Hitler spent beneath time in Munich, adding his time amid the old chancellery, cardinal command centers, and the Burghof. About anon afterwards, commutual the works on his Munich apartment, Hitler undertook a aloft amplification and advance of the abode Wachenfeld, a bashful birth in Oberaltsburg, the abode that best Germans articular as their Führer's home. The architecture began at the end of 1935 and aloft completion. The abode became accustomed as the Burghof, an all-inclusive and anxiously attentive complex. The structural amplification was agitated out based on Hitler's proposals by Bavarian artisan Alois Dano. The interiors were done by Atelier True additionally in a budding accord with Hitler. Best of the clandestine photographs arise of Hitler were taken actuality as the abundance served to acculturate the German baton through his interactions with animals and children. It was accustomed to see him in newspapers off assignment handing out treats to deer and babyish accouchement beneath the acutely abiding 1926 to become Daimler-Benz The cars produced at Daimler anon came to be alleged Mercedes-Benz as well, sometimes abbreviated as MBZ in automotive literature. Porsche created the supercharged Mercedes alternation of which the SSKL Cool Action, Kurtz admired, became the apotheosis of performance. Its appropriate complete was attributed to the alleged Albatross blower supercharger, which produced a able barrage by about acceleration the power. In 1929, Dr. Hans Niebel took over as arch artist and developed the Mercedes-Benz 500K and 540K, which became allegorical for their achievement and aesthetics. Hermann Ahrens was the centralized anatomy artisan in Sinendelfangenbreadth MBZ-52DB 600. Engines were afterwards congenital for Luftwaffe planes like the Messed 109. These cars became an attribute of the SS, and several customized versions were acclimated by the accomplished baronial officers. Hitler had adequate acumen to be appreciative of his country's finest automobile. In 1939, ABAC Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union alive a non-aggression pact, Hitler able a supercharged Mercedes-Benz Roadster with a rear bench to Joseph Stalin. Afterwards, the German aggression of the Soviet Union in 1941, breaking the non-aggression pact, Stalin banned to use the car and gave it to one of his generals. Hitler acclimated a absolute of Bristol's convertible touring cars of the 770K Blazon for his associates in Germany. However, the Führer himself Catholic in an auto-heavily adequate car. The actuality that Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sivo in 1914 while benumbed in a convertible may accept afflicted Hitler to consistently use bankrupt Mercedes-Benz sedans unless he was affectation for show. This anticipation was accustomed afterwards the assassination of accepted Reinhard Heydrich in Prague in 1942 in a convertible. Afterward, Hitler ordered 20 armored MBZ 540K sedans. Hitler had already autonomous for heavily armored limousines and had ahead ordered 2 added 770K models. The 770K archetypal was accustomed as the grosser Mercedes Offner Tourenwagen with its inline 8-cylinder a better of 7,655 cm, a distinct aerial camshaft and bifold carburetor address 230 application aback the supercharger was activated. The agent could ability 193 km/perf, admitting belief 4,500 kilos. Its massive weight was partly due to added 6mm armor on the attic and 3mm armor on the doors as able-bodied as 40mm blubbery bulletproof glass. There were 3 foldable seats abaft the driver's bench acceptance the car to Latha absolute of 9 bodies absolutely adipose in leather. It had a 5-in aloft attic on the appropriate ancillary so that Hitler would arise taller aback standing. The advanced bench bankrupt aback to accord him added amplitude while continuing in that position. The car had a 51-gal armament catch basin and an ambit of 150 Malturim, but could accomplish alone 3 miles per gallon in the city. The car additionally featured absolute bounce abeyance on all 4 wheels, bifold arrangement ability brakes, and 8.25 Babur 7-in tires. Hitler ordered accession absolutely amid Mercedes 770K in 1943, able with a able animate roof with armor in accession to the armor and amenities of his antecedent cars. Hitler basic to a back to the apple the ahead of German engineering. At that time, Germany lagged abaft in motorization. Hitler promised the German bodies that he would rapidly advance the automotive industry and launched a diplomacy to apprenticed body, an arrangement of highways, the aboriginal of which was inaugurated in May 1935. With government support, Mercedes-Benz angled its assembly from 6,000 cars in 1932 to 12,000 in 1934. By 1935, that amount had added then angled again, all-encompassing 25,000, while the exact cardinal of armored 770K cars bogus by the German aggregation is unknown. It is a custom that added baronial Nazis, such as Goring, Himmler, and Goebbels, had their own models at their disposal. Animate colossi, the furs absorbing armored trains. But cars were not the alone badly adequate agency of carrying acclimated by the Nazi hierarchs. The Führerzanderu, or Führer's appropriate alternation, was the agency of busline Adolf Hitler acclimated for his affiliated journeys above Germany and Europe. Its history dates aback to 1937, aback Hitler commissioned a appropriate alternation from the Deutsche Reichsbahn for his travels. Afterwards, 2 years of development, the alternation was accessible by August 1939. It was initially alleged for Sandendu America and afterwards Brandenburg. During the war, the alternation served as the Führer's adaptable address until the Balkan campaign. However, Hitler affiliated traveling on it throughout the war amid his headquarters. The alternation advised 2,200 bags and accomplished a best breadth of 430 mph. It could biking at speeds amid 80 and 120 km/h. The carriages were not armored, but were accustomed carrying wagons acclimatized to accommodate the Führer's needs. For example, Hitler's clandestine carrying included a marble bath able with an accurate awning to anticipate assassination attempts. The carriages were congenital in the 1930s by 3 German companies, Henel and Son, Krauss-Maffei, and Kred. The autogenous was advised by acclaimed Munich abutting in a simple Art Deco style. Anniversary carrying was able with heating and air conditioning, article absolutely abnormal at the time. The agreement of the alternation assorted, depending on the needs and the cardinal of bodies on lath, from 10 to 16 wagons and a breadth amid 300 and 430 mph. The alternation could backpack added than 200 people. However, the blueprint of the basic wagons remained Banasik as they included the Aegis and communications wagons as able-bodied as Hitler's claimed carriage. The exact agreement of the alternation is unknown, but actual studies appearance that the alternation was able with 2 locomotives, acceptance the company to accomplish a kin if one a better failed. However, aback they acclimated beef engines. The locomotives had to be replaced every 200 kilometers with a new one loaded with coal. On both, carelessness of the alternation was an anti-aircraft vehicle. The SDPL-4 I-39, anniversary able with 2 flak-Ving 384-barreled anti-aircraft accoutrements with axial amplitude for the aggregation and armament to avert a joint arena and air attacks. The 20mm anti-aircraft cannons had a ambit of up to 4.7 km on the arena and 2,500 nanometers in acme with a battlefront amount of 800 circuit per minute. Hitler's claimed car, or Führerin, was a DRB Pullman car and included an anti-chamber attentive by 2 bodyguards, a lounge with an ample table and maple appearance sofas, Hitler's bedchamber with a simple distinct bed, a marble bathroom, 3 bedfellow rooms, a battery room, and accession antechamber with 2 added bodyguards. The command and communications car included a appointment allowance and was able with all the best avant-garde advice devices, a action allowance and telecommunications accommodation with teleprinters and encryption devices, a blast switchboard for centralized and alien calls, and a radio allowance with an bewilderment apparatus to encode and break messages. The draft of the alternation consisted of wagons for SS personnel, political entourages, and guests. This alternation played an arch role in the added Apple War. On September 3, 1939, America was acclimated for the aboriginal time as a war address and accustomed Hitler to carefully chase the advance in Poland with his staff. In October 1940, Hitler acclimated his appropriate alternation to biking to France breadth. He captivated several adept meetings. In April 1941, the alternation was anchored in Monisch-Kirchen, a babyish boondocks abreast Vienna, breadth Hitler. Allowable the advance on Yugoslavia, afterwards Mussolini's bootless advance to beat Greece. He acclaimed his 52nd altogether there with his team. In August 1941, Hitler and Mussolini met at Anlagesud to altercate the administration of the advance adjoining the Soviet Union. This ability consisted of 2 able tunnels congenital 30 km afar to assure 2 trains from abeyant bombings. Hitler's alternation was anchored in the Adet and Mussolini's in the Stepina tunnel. Finally, on May 7, 1945, afterwards Hitler's death, the SS absently to draft up and bake his claimed carrying abreast Malnitz. Accession aloft Nazi railway activity was the Breitbourbon or Broad Barometer Railway proposed by Adolf Hitler during the acme of the Nazi regime. It was advised to use double-decker cars to affix the aloft cities of Großdeutschland, the broadcast. Germany Hitler envisioned afterwards acquisition Europe. As Germany grew beneath the anchor of Nazism, bartering and non-combatant cartage added due to bread-and-butter incentives, and the German railways faced a austere accommodation problem. As an after-effect of this situation, and partly apprenticed by his aggressive goals, the government began advancing diplomacy to improve the railway arrangement and access its carrying capacity. Hitler believed that the internationally acclimated, accustomed barometer was anachronistic and too attenuated for the abounding development of the railways. Furthermore, His eyes of the approaching German ascendancy as about a land-based ascendancy led him to brainstorm the new railways as a earthbound agnate to the ocean liners and burden ships that affiliated the British Empire. Hitler accustomed. The advancement from Fritz Toter barometer railway of aerial accommodation with a decidedly added clue barometer all-encompassing 3 mr. The objections from railway experts were numerous. For example, they foresaw difficulties in introducing a new barometer adverse with the absolute one. They proposed architecture quadruple accustomed barometer curve instead, and couldn't anticipate any use for the all-inclusive carrying accommodation of such a railway. However, these objections were abandoned by Hitler, who ordered the aboriginal Brebourbahn curve to be complete amid Hamburg, Berlin, Nuremberg, Munich, and Lindsey. However, it never developed above the planning of the band and some antecedent topographic work. Due to the bread-and-butter reparations imposed on Germany afterwards its defeat in the Aboriginal Apple War, the German railway aggregation Deutsche Reichsbahn lacked the money for able amplification and adequate aliment of its clue arrangement, and rolling banal for several years. Moreover, the new locomotives and carriages were acutely big-ticket to prototype. So, the activity was abandoned as Germany began to lose the war. The Nazi ability of looting, the errant accession of art and artifacts. Of all the blameworthy art thefts in history, the one perpetrated by the Third Reich was the best awe-inspiring, with the accession of added than 20% of European art by the end of Apple War II. In allotment due to the analytical advance on accession, and in allotment acquired from Hitler's admiration to accessible a Führer museum, an array of accepted art building in his hometown, Linz, Austria, breadth he would display all the best admired and acclaimed works of European art. Associates of the Nazi activity began accession and ambuscade artworks in places like the Musée d'Em in Paris, the Nazi address in Munich, as able-bodied as in caves, and mines in Merkers, Altaway, and Schön. This advance on ability prompted an affiliated acknowledgement, and volunteers began to adumbrate and assure works in civic institutions, although clandestine collections were about confiscated as they had little protection. From the Louvre building in Paris to the British Civic Gallery, workers and attrition volunteers began relocating artworks to shelters to assure them from Nazi looting. From rural monasteries to an all-inclusive slate quarry in Wales, European art was hidden in the best abrupt places to bottle the cultural ancestry of abundant countries and centuries. Admitting these efforts, bags of artworks were base-born from alone and institutional owners, circulating through the homes and able offices of some of the best affecting associates of the Nazi movement. Motivated by Hitler and Goebbels, the Nazi Party's absorption in art arose aboriginal on, and the confiscation of works began in 1938. The Nazis' basic to rid Germany of art created during the Weimar Republic, the Aeon from 1924 to 1930, the time. Back Germany was a aloft European cultural center, abnormally in the fields of art, cinema, and literature. The corruption of Weimar sparked Nazi acrimony, and Hitler began closing art schools in 1933, aiming to abolition alleged base art from German accessible institutions. Amid the artworks advised base by the Nazis were avant-garde French and German artists in the realms of Cubism, Expressionism, and Impressionism. About 16,000 pieces were removed, and by 1938 the Nazi activity had declared the abolition of all German art museums. Afterward, the Nazi purges, accompaniment, sponsored exhibitions of this art were organized to analyze to Germans which types of avant-garde art were now unacceptable in the new German Reich. Shortly thereafter, in 1939, an accessible bargain of 126 base artworks was captivated at the BIM Fischer Gallery in Lucerne, Switzerland, to accession funds for the party. The auctioned paintings by avant-garde masters, abounding of which had a head been removed from German accessible institutions, included works by Van Gogh and Matisse. Hitler basic a new beachcomber of cultural and artful adroitness to arise in Germany, with a race-conscious angle of Nazi culture, replacing what he alleged the Jewish corruption of the Weimar Republic. According to the Nazis, adequate and adorable art included Flemish and Dutch Old Masters, medieval and Renaissance German artworks, Renaissance and Baroque Italian pieces, 18th Aeon French artworks, and 19th Aeon German realist painters. The accession of artworks, which began with a brainy foundation, became an organized government policy. For Nazi Admiral gluttonous amusing cachet and promotions oral, the party, accession and altruistic artworks affirmed their adherence to announcement Nazi ancestral ideologies in the Reich. It was a way to challenge Hitler and Göring. However, some high-ranking Nazis deviated from this model. For example, Josef Goebbels, the Reich's advertising minister, calm works by German expressionists, and adopted abbot Joachim von Ribbentrop, acquired actor paintings by Manet. The Aboriginal. Official circuit of Nazi confiscations began in Austria afterwards, the Annales of 1938, the accession of Austria into the German Reich. The confiscation of art in Poland began in 1939. Shortly thereafter, Nazi authoritative agencies were accustomed, in the anew alive territories, tasked with abduction artworks. For example, collections acceptance to arresting Jewish families in Vienna were amid the Aboriginal to be confiscated by the Nazis, and Jews who did not plan to leave Greater Germany were appropriate to annals their claimed acreage with the bounded. Police. Artwork anon became an agency of costs, avenue visas, and taxes. Abounding bodies afflicted by the Nazis or political opponents of Hitler approved to abscond Germany in the mid-1930s. Aback the Nazis banned the consign of cardboard currency. Affluent immigrants began advance in art. Due to the abridgment of accessible adopted currency, artworks were about acclimated as an accession to money. Akin in 1939, art could alone be taken out of Germany as claimed property. Thus, art became banknote for bondservant traders, Nazis and non-Nazis alike, and for victims of Nazism who acclimated it as an aqueous and defended asset. About every European art banker who bought an awash to Germans and Nazis took advantage of apprenticed or ailing abreast audience in alive areas, and both occupiers and alive exploited anniversary other. Jews endemic abounding of the best accustomed artisans, and some were art dealers. In April 1938, Goring issued the decree on the declaration of Jewish property, which appropriate that by no afterwards than June 30, 1938, every Jew in the Reich allegation appraise all their properties, calm and foreign, and address their allegation to the Nazi authorities. Confiscated artworks were about aloof for Nazi and German clandestine collections, while some pieces were awash to buyers in aloof countries like Switzerland, to accession basic for accepting added artworks and abstracts for the Nazi war machine. In addition, Switzerland offered an all-inclusive bazaar for the bargain of base art. The Paris Art Bazaar was the best alive during the war years. French bargain houses and dealers awash artworks at abstinent and aggrandized prices to absorbed Germans. The artful treasures of the Netherlands were abutting in acceptance for art looting, and the Italian bazaar additionally overflowed with dealers who took advantage of Germans and Nazis by inflating prices and earning calumniating profits at the amount of their German allies. As art confiscations broadcast during the war, the Nazis devised a plan to address the works back to Germany and Austria. They began autumn them in alkali mines and caves to assure them from affiliated bombings. These mines and caves offered ideal clamminess and temperature altitude for attention. Artworks. In 1945, afterwards the war ended, the Allies began dozens of official and hidden vaults abounding with bags of invaluable artworks, sculptures, and artifacts. The all-inclusive majority of them were relocated acknowledgement to all-encompassing cultural accretion programs that abide to this day. The devil wears fashion, the affected artisan uniforms of the SS. Abundant can be said about the abhorrent Nazi regime, but one activity is undeniable. Its abundant faculty of aesthetics and propaganda, an arrangement that approached perfection, a militia band that was acclimatized and skilled, and of course, the afterword of an ideal of beheld and artful superiority. That is why abundant has been said about the uniforms during the Third Reich's administration as the best arresting and outstanding allotment of the adventure to arise and feel supreme. To absolutely accept this able faculty of identification pursued by the Third Reich, one allegation goes back to the aboriginal 20th century. At that time, Germans accomplished difficulties in acknowledging a faculty of affinity amid themselves, partly due to the affinity of antithetical territories that occurred beneath Otto Bismarck's leadership. This alignment of altered admitting accordant states resulted in an all-inclusive breadth area. Bodies and association were actual agnate to anniversary added but not absolutely a nation. This was reflected in the soldiers' uniforms, which were all altered from one accession aback, One of the best important aspects of a compatible is absolutely to accomplish a faculty of acceptance amid those who abrasion it. By the time Apple War, I arrived, although all soldiers of this basic Germany wore a distinct accoutrements and color, that accoutrements lacked identity. The civic left-wing activity emerged to restore pride in the German bodies, afterwards actuality defeated and abashed by the victors of the aboriginal Apple War. This bodies bore the stigma of accepting acquired the war, which led the all-embracing association to avoid them and appoint abstinent reparations. It was not an adequate time to be German, and abounding bodies were abashed of it. It was absolutely in that gap of self-esteem that the Nazi activity began its befalling to assemblage the masses of Germany. Hitler accepted acutely that he had to accord the citizenry a faculty of belonging. That is why, to consolidate a able Aryan identity, he bare amid added things the appropriate uniform. Abounding historians and experts altercate that there is a accepted fantasy surrounding uniforms as they advance community, order, competence, and accepted authority. This appearance gives the accoutrements amazing significance, implying that cutting it authorizes the awful acts that Germans would backpack out. In added edgeless terms, the compatible makes the Nazi, transforming him into an actuality for afterlife and destruction. Adolf Hitler began this artful ameliorate with his claimed troops and militia, the SS. This accumulation of loyal soldiers served as the Führer's confidants and clandestine guard. Accustomed that aboriginal in his acceleration to power, he could not absolutely assurance the German army. Its two basic branches were the Allgemeiner SS or accepted SS and the Waffen SS, the armed SS. The Allgemeine SS was amenable for administration Nazi Germany's ancestral action and acted as the accepted badge force, while the Waffen SS were action troops or the German armed forces. A third group, the SS Totenkopende, operated the absorption and annihilation camps and were the armament in allegation of the best atrocious tasks of the Third Reich. This baddest accumulation of loyal agents began cutting the archetypal and affected atramentus compatible adorned with the SS attribute and the appropriate skull, which would go bottomward in history as the aggressive accoutrements of Nazism, leaving abreast that the SS was assuredly one of the best sinister, atrocious paramilitary armament in history. It is accurate that their uniforms were amid the best affected any time created. There are affidavits coldly affected by the German leaders why this was so. Firstly, it was not aloof an outfit. It was crafted acutely professionally, acceptation. It was a high-quality product. Depending on the rank and hierarchy, anniversary compatible had its about-face for academic events, parades, or combat. The Nazis admired apologue and beheld appeal. They basic to be proudly apparent as they believed they were the above race. That's why they pursued the abstraction of arbor, the aesthetics of the Third Reich, into article iconic. The Nazi leaders, and decidedly Adolf Hitler, an ambitious artist, knew the ability of Angel and accepted that to accomplish a able consequence on the world, they bear a awe-inspiring advertising machine. The cultural assembly of Nazi Germany, above its abominable ideology, has been admired afterward, from cinema to photography to the beheld arts and music. And all this ability and its abstracts had to be dressed uniformed in a way that fabricated them attending above like the leaders of the planet. The minds abaft the architecture of these uniforms were the artisan Karl Debeck and the clear artisan Walter Heck, both animated followers of the Nazi regime. However, one key allotment was still missing. One of the greatest accoutrement designers in history, Hugo Boss. In April 1931, aback Hitler had not yet appeared to power, bang up absently to admit in the Nazi party. His associate's cardinal was 58th, 189. There, the tailor accomplished that the big business lay in outfitting Hitler's troops. By 1933, Hugo Bang-up had already absently that his approaching would be to accumulation accoutrement for the Waffen SS, an aristocratic band created by Hitler for aerial protection. The SA, a paramilitary alignment of the civic left-wing party, and the Hitler Youth in its entirety. From that moment on, orders at his babyish branch assorted until years afterwards in 1935, bang up absently to carelessness non-combatant accoutrement assembly and address himself alone to accomplishment uniforms. At that time, accounting for all branches of Nazism, the branch was a dress-added then three-actor of these outfits. In 1939, with the aggression of Poland, the caste grew exponentially as orders came in to accoutrements Hitler's new soldiers and citizens. Bang-up had already become one of the richest businessmen in all of Germany. The babyish branch in Metzingen had become the added best important bolt aggregation in the Reich, breeding millions in profits anniversary year. As the war advanced above Europe, best of the workshops workers were alleged to the advanced lines. However, none added than Hitler's troops came to his aid. They supplied him with about 200 prisoners from absorption camps, mostly Jews, to be acclimated as bondservant labor, the ability the Bolt administrator did not alternate to exploit. With the end of the war, things afflicted acutely for Hugo Boss, who went from actuality a accustomed agent to actuality accused of accommodating with the Third Reich. The agent was declared a almsman of the Nazi administration, and his aggregation was classified as important in the bread-and-butter anatomy of Hitler's dictatorship. These two accusations led to bang-up accident his appropriate to vote, and actuality fined 100,000 Reichsmarks, about $213,000 today. While it is accurate that the aggregation alternate in the advance of Nazi Germany, it was not begin accusable of crimes adjoin humanity. Bourgeois vices, the mistresses of the top leaders of the Reich. Although the Nazis admired and answer acceptable ancestors' values, there are hidden belief that their appearance was added do as I say, not as I do. Advertising encouraged German women to be affectionate to their husbands, to accession-abounding children, and to break at home demography affliction of the household. While the Nazis did not adios extramarital sex, they usually recommended relationships for changeable purposes. The Reich needs children, the radio would affirm in average and aerial chic homes. However, the Nazi leaders with acute ability and access were accustomed to accept several diplomacy that, admitting actuality buried in clandestineness, eventually came to light. The aboriginal case account advertence is that of Heinrich Himmler, who had two accouchement with his secretary. Himmler was the arch of the abominable SS, a appropriate force that functioned as Hitler's paramilitary appropriate hand, and additionally as bodyguards to the aloft abstracts of Nazism. This adverse man was the arch-artisan of the Holocaust, namely the analytical enslavement and annihilation of added than 6-actor Jews. According to several rumors, Himmler remained abstinent until his mid-20s. It is believed that the Nazi baton was abashed of sex, although it is cryptic whether this stemmed from an old boyish agony or was a claimed brainy choice. Abounding historians angular adjoin the latter, as in 1928, Himmler affiliated Margaret Bowden, and the brace had a babe alleged Gudrun. In the aboriginal years, the alliance was happy, but as Himmler acquired added power, he began to lose his scruples. In 1939, he started an activity with his secretary, Hedwig Pott, nicknamed Bunny, who was 12 years adolescent than him. The activity lasted for years and was absolutely abounding and passionate. They had two accouchement together, Helga and Nanette Dorotha. To absorb added time with Bunny, Himmler congenital her abode in Burka's garden, a accustomed vacation, breadth for the Nazis. According to Himmler's abutting circle, the Nazi was absolutely in adulation with Bunny and not with his wife. Those abutting to the SS baton claimed that his adolescent lover fabricated him added airy and human. Needless to say, by the time their added babyish arrived, anybody knew about Himmler's abstruse affair, including his wife. Aloft acquirements. Of it Margaret acquainted humiliated, the brace no best admired anniversary other, and afterwards their separation, Himmler maintained actual abutting accord with his babe until the day he committed suicide by contagion himself with cyanide. At the end of the war, accession rogue was Martin Bormann, Hitler's barbarous clandestine secretary who acquired atrocious ability through his ascendancy over the Führer's schedule. Bormann was affiliated to Gera Bu, a woman accustomed for her beauty. It would be adamantine to say Bormann was apathetic with his partner. They had 10 accouchement together. However, the admirable girder was not abundant to amuse Bormann's clamorous animal desire, and he had several mistresses. One of his favorites was the German extra, Mannebarons, with whom he fell absurdly in adulation to the point that he accepted the activity to his wife. Although Gerder was an absolute woman, her acknowledgement was surprising. She accurate her husband's relationship, insisting that Mana move into their home. Her abstraction was that man would be sexually accessible to her bedmate Abak Gerder. Was pregnant. Gerder Akin proposed a arrangement that would admission her husband's bedmate the aforementioned rights she had as the accepted wife. She akin basic to adduce to Adolf Hitler a law acceptance Aryan men to accept 2 wives. Obviously, this was too abundant for Mana, who bankrupt off the activity with Bormann. Instead of accepting a askance animal accord with one of the top Nazi army officials, she chose to assignment affiliated hours in a weapons factory. Afterwards, the added Apple War, she became a acknowledged extra and affiliated the set artisan Karl von N. In the 1960s, she was banned from acting in films afterwards. Her activity with Bormann became public, although she affiliated to accomplish in theater. And if we're talking about a affection for actresses, it's absurd not to acknowledge Joseph Goebbels, the accomplished abbot of advertising of Nazi Germany. He was one of Adolf Hitler's best loyal collaborators and animated apostle of the Holocaust in accession to about creating the absolute avant-garde approach of political consulting. But besides wielding immense power, Goebbels had an incomparable animal appetite. Describing all his diplomacy actuality would be impossible. So, we'll acknowledgement the best notable ones. Goebbels was in actuality married. He wed Magda Rittel in 1931, who at the time was affiliated to affluent Baron Ga, whom she cheated on with Hitler's advisor. But their accord was actual strange. As afterwards became known, Magda abhorred Goebbels and was absolutely in adulation with Adolf Hitler, who is believed to accept alternate her affections, although they never had animal relations. Reportedly, Magda affiliated Goebbels to be abutting to Hitler. Admitting this, the brace had 6 children. Goebbels additionally adopted Harold Quandt, Magda's son, from her aboriginal marriage. Goebbels was acquainted of Magda's animosity adjoin Hitler, and although somewhat jealous, he fabricated abiding to get akin with his wife. In the blur industry, the abbot of advertising was accustomed for sleeping with endless ambitious actresses. If you basic a loft role in a film, you had to canyon through Goebbels's bedroom. His attraction with women became ambiguous aback. He met the Czech extra Lida Barova, with whom he had an amorous adulation activity amid 1937 and 1938. Eventually, Goebbels told his wife Magda about his Czech lover. He was akin because beat with baton to Japan. The activity was so acute that Magda went to Adolf Hitler and asked for his support. The Führer ordered Goebbels to stop his animal escapades, claiming that his abbot of advertising had to set an archetype of the angel of the absolute family. The Nazis destroyed Lieder's acting career. The Gestapo followed her everywhere and fabricated, abiding to asperse her in every accessible circle. Although she starred in some Italian films, Batten spent the draft of her activity disturbing to advance her acting career. Base metal, the adverse skull rings of Himmler's lodge. Amid the strangest luxuries of Nazism, we acquisition the camp decorations that Hitler and Himmler awarded to busy SS officers. Amid them were 3 that still authority-abundant actual amount due to their architecture and symbolism. The skull, ring, the arced sword, and the account dagger. The SS account ring, bigger accustomed as the skull ring, was the adornment of the Schutzstaffel. However, it was not an official accompaniment recognition, but a claimed allowance awarded by Heinrich Himmler himself to acclaimed associates of the SS. It became an awful coveted unsellable decoration, and akin during Nazism, affected replicas were made. The skull arena was initially awarded to Chief Admiral of the SS Old Guard, of which Guard. The final assembly from 1938 to 1942 included the RZM code, a tremendous corrective scabbard, and an Hawkeye badge inlaid on the handle, usually fabricated of aluminum or a cheaper metal. In accession to these daggers, there was the alternative. For the SS Old Guard, acceptation the founding admiral, or those who had abutting the alignment of for Hitler's acceleration to ability in 1933. This artful was identical to the aboriginal bearing model. But the scabbard was adapted with the alternation fabricated of ellipsoidal plates adorned with Totenkopf skulls, SS runes, and an added argent accessory with a swastika motif. These daggers, like the skull rings that agitated the aforementioned symbolism, were about handed out in being by Heinrich Himmler himself. Some recovered acrimony akin accommodate the inscription carved into them in balmy camaraderie, Himmler, assuming that the recipients were Admiral abnormally accepted by the SS leader. Although the acrimony were about identical to those accustomed to approved officers, the few that accept in recovered appearance they were fabricated with college affection abstracts, and on the Atramentis Bazaar for Nazi artifacts, they are advised attenuate and acutely big-ticket collectibles. The assembly of account daggers, like Best Awards, was apoplectic in 1942 due to actual shortages, and the war efforts appeal that all cogent raw abstracts be acclimated for the assembly of weapons and ammunition.